Welcome to Everlasting Talk. Hello, welcome to Everlasting Talk. I'm your host, Ever, and today we're doing a biography series on Harriet Tubman. Before we continue, or before we start, make sure to check out my social media links on Linktree. I have X, formerly known as Twitter, a Twitch channel, a blogger channel. I started a Kick channel. Check us out. Check me out on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more, and Instagram as well. I forgot about that one. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. We're doing a biography series on Harriet Tubman. Also, make sure to go to Teespring or Spring and get your merch. All your purchases go towards me getting better equipment. Thank you so much. But here we go. Harriet Tubman was an abolitionist and a social activist, most famously for being a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Born Araminta Ross in Dorchester County, Maryland, in March 1822. It's often conflicted based on historians and different books I've read. Many say 1815, some say 1820, but I think consensusly they all say about March 1822. So there's no exact day, but based because at that time, based on records, it was iffy the records. But yeah, most historians say March 1822. All right, born to Harriet Green and Ben Ross in a plantation as slaves, she would have several siblings, but all or many of them would be sold off to other plantations. Unfortunately, she herself would be rented out to other plantations. Almost died of measles, but survived. Um, she suffered a severe head injury at the age of 12 when she was hit by mistake by a 2 pound metal weight. She didn't receive medical care for about 2 days. She would end up getting severe, painful headaches throughout her life. And some experts say she probably had a episode of epilepsy or narcolepsy. Obviously, at the time they didn't test her, but based on like her symptoms and that's what they determined. And from her injuries, she would often suffer severe seizures and also suffer fainting spells, or she'll faint a lot. Eventually, she would experience visions and dreams about God shaping her future. That's also a contribution from the head injury. I think she experienced a better clarity according to her, but she was still suffering from major headaches and stuff like that through the rest of her life. Around 1844, she ended up marrying a free black man by the name of John Tubman, thus changing her name to Harriet in a memory or in respect of her mother. Um, and then obviously she took Tubman as her last name, so she would go as Harriet Tubman from now on, no longer as Araminta Ross or Minty. They will call her as a nickname. Eventually, by 1849, there was a time for a change. She and her two brothers escaped on September 17, 1847. Uh, but her brothers were having second thoughts, leaving their wives and children behind, especially they were still captive themselves. So they forced her to come back against her will, and she would go ahead and try again a month or so later, but this time by herself because she knew that if she took her brothers or anyone else, they might want to return, and she did not want to return at all. Um, she would, she would go ahead and try, like I said, a month or so later, and she would go towards Pennsylvania. At the time, Maryland was still a slave state, and Pennsylvania was a free state. So she only traveled by night to avoid detection and be guided by the Northern Star. She would have allies along the way. Due to contrary belief, she didn't actually create the Underground Railroad. It's actually it was already in motion. So a lot of people were allies. A lot of different people were part of were allies. So they would hide her in their homes, or they would like pretend to be, the slave master themselves until the coast was clear at night, and she would go and travel. She would finally go on to Pennsylvania, where she would go to Philly. Before I continue, she would mention I forgot to mention the husband. He decided to stay. He was a free man, so he didn't have to worry about it. But he would stay in Maryland. But she moved to Philly. She would end up she would save up money by doing odd jobs here and there. At that time, the U.S. Congress passed the Slave Act in 1850. So it pretty much forced people to return to slavery, even in states that abolished slavery. So like in the state of Pennsylvania and some other ones, there was no slavery; it was abolished there. But due to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, um, they would have to report like, hey, you have to return whatever to Maryland or whatever state. So it was another trial tribulation for her because she would go ahead and try to free people herself in Maryland. In 1851, she would look for a husband, John, but when she arrived, she realized that she found out that he got remarried, and actually, and she was furious, but because he refused to leave. But I think he had a child on the way, or he had a child already with the other woman, so it was kind of like kind of hard for her. But she still ended up taking 11 people with her to Philadelphia that time. So she did that trip. Although she was mad, she did take it upon herself to take some people with her. Between 1851 and 1862, she led over 70 people to freedom. She would free her parents and the rest of her family. She will end up going to Southwest Ontario to Canada because Canada abolished slavery. Little known fact: Mexico had abolished slavery as well in 1810. So it's kind of weird how the U.S. was the only country that didn't. But slave owners would post a $40,000 reward for her capture or death. At that time, 40,000 was a lot. So yeah, 40,000 back then must have been like, I don't know, like half a million or something like that, or a million. I don't know the exact number. But during the American Civil War, she would be a spy for the Union and a nurse. She would aid people in their, their amputations and their health, both black and white soldiers. So she would definitely be a contribution to that. After the war was over, obviously slavery was abolished, and she would marry a former Union soldier by the name of Nelson, moving to the state of New York in Auburn. By 1911, she was getting ill, and unfortunately on March 10th, 1913, she would die of pneumonia. Buried at Fort Hill Cemetery with semi-military honors for her service during the American Civil War. She was well respected in several, she was well respected throughout history during her life and after her life. She has several national parks have been after her, monuments. She was the first African American woman to be on the U.S. postal stamp in 1978. If you ever get trivia on that. Also, in 1995, she'll be on the stamp. Several schools, um, highways, streets, and more being named after her. So she was definitely a person that was very, very well respected throughout history in her life and after her life. After she passed away. Obviously, she was very influential. Like I said, she didn't create the Underground Railroad; it was already in motion. But she would be very, very, very influential because she never lost a passenger. Everybody that she took with her, they made it to freedom. So she's definitely a person. They called her Moses, if because she led her people to freedom, and she did it well. Some movies you could look into. The most recent movie you could look into is called Harriet from 2019. I watched that movie in theaters. It was amazing. Obviously, I always check accuracy on that. Also, check out A Woman Called Moses from 1978. It was a mini series. Like I mentioned, they called her Moses because she led people to freedom. Like I said, over 70. You could do The Quest of Freedom from 1992 as a movie as well, a little reference. Obviously, there's other movies as well, but these are the three I recommend. Some books you could look into is Harriet Tubman, The Road to Freedom by Catherine Clinton. Also, Bound for the Promised Land by Kate Clifford Larson, and also Freedom Train by Dorothy Sterling. I'm not sponsored by any of these movies or books, but they're good resources for you to check out. But yeah, Harriet Tubman was an influential person throughout history. I definitely recommend checking out these movies and books. Obviously, doing your own research as well. But thank you guys so much for joining me today. Like I said, like, subscribe, and follow. Check out all my social media. Check out my link tree. That's where you can find everything. And thank you guys so much. In the next episode, we're talking about Al Capone. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye, y'all. Thank you for listening to this episode of Everlasting Talk. For more content, follow us on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at Everlasting Talk. Thank you.